Coming up, we're going to talk about Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server and some exciting new features Azure Arc brings to hybrid and multi-cloud environments. I'm here with Raj, Principal Program Manager for Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server. How are you doing, Raj?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for asking.
So obviously in hybrid and multi-cloud environments, data workloads are very trending and are very important for these environments. So what are the challenges you are seeing when it comes to data and customers working in these environments?
So when we talk to a lot of these enterprise customers, a lot of these customers really want to adapt the multi-cloud and as well as the hybrid scenarios. There are few reasons why customers really want to adapt those scenarios is because there are some workloads customers cannot really be able to migrate to the public cloud because of the regulatory restrictions, compliance requirements. And there are some workloads that they're not immediately ready to migrate to the cloud. So they have to maintain them where they exist today. And then there are few other workloads that they cannot really migrate, in a one single migration project. They need to do like a phase-wise type of migrations to begin with. And there are few other customers who told us that they invested a lot on the existing infrastructure and they just want to continue to leverage the investment that they made in their own infrastructure. But at the same time, they really want to really modernize their workloads. So these are the specific reasons why some of our enterprise customers really want to adapt hybrid and cloud scenarios basically. But when they adapt these scenarios, there are few challenges actually. So when my workloads are spread across multiple of these environments, whether it could be in public cloud like Azure or non-Azure public clouds, private clouds, VMware, when these infrastructure and IT assets are spread across of these multiple environments, how do you really get a single view of all my assets and their dependencies of their workloads? And then how can we be able to centrally manage them and then really secure them is the biggest challenge that our customers are today facing.
So today we're going to talk about Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server, and I guess that can help solving some of these challenges. So we also have Azure Arc-enabled SQL Managed Instance already released, and with Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server, we bring another powerful service to hybrid and multi-cloud environments. Now, can you explain me a little bit like what the differences are between those two and where I would use what?
So we talked about some of the challenges customers are facing in adapting hybrid and multi-cloud scenarios. And then Microsoft has an answer for those type of challenges. Microsoft really invested a lot in bringing innovation into the cloud services with a cloud first strategy. So there's a lot of innovation built into Azure. So primarily in the past, all these services and all these innovations are only available for the assets which are sitting in the Azure. Now what we did is that now we are bringing the power of Azure that we built over the years to your assets which are sitting in non-Azure environments as well. That could be your on-premises environment, that could be your private cloud or some data center or any other clouds other than Azure. One way to do it is that without even really migrating your existing SQL Server databases, you can really start integrating those cloud services into your existing SQL Server itself, wherever that SQL Server is being deployed, and then start leveraging all the power of the cloud and then secure your environments, manage your environments, operate your environments centrally. So that is called Arc-enabled SQL Server. All you just need to do is just enable your SQL Server with the Arc platform. And we're going to be talking deep about some of the capabilities and how to do that as well. Right? That's one way to do it. But there is another way where you really want to modernize your environments, your workloads, but at the same time you cannot really migrate to the public cloud. Then very simply, we want to bring cloud to your doorsteps. That is exactly Arc-enabled data services. So with the platform as a service capabilities that we built on the cloud, the built-in high availability, built-in disaster recovery, built-in security features that really safeguard your environments, all those features we can really deploy you in your own infrastructure. Two database services that we enabled so far. One is the Azure Arc SQL Server managed instance, and then Azure Arc Postgres SQL Server. So these are the two services primarily available now. Pretty soon we are going to be adding more into this family.
This is fantastic, and I love that we give the customers like different options and choices depending on their workloads. Now, speaking of these workloads, when does a customer choose what service, and like maybe you can help me a little bit more when it comes to the decision process there?
Yes, that's a very good question. Actually, Microsoft provided multiple choices to you in order to give you the flexibility to deploy the services wherever you want and whichever way that your business really needed it. I have a very simple algorithm for you to decide on which workloads goes to which type of deployment option that Microsoft provided to you. So if your workloads are ready to migrate to Azure, and then there are no blockers migrating to the Azure, the best bet is that you can really migrate to Azure. In the case of existing databases like SQL Server and PostgreSQL, you can really leverage Azure database for my PostgreSQL and or the MySQL in case of MySQL, or Azure database for SQL Server managed instance. So that's one option. But in the case if your workloads cannot be migrated to Azure, there are two options that are provided to you. One is Arc-enabled SQL Server, where this really helps you in case you are coming up with some legacy workloads, and then have some dependency on analysis services to really run some business intelligent applications, or dependency on reporting services, as a matter of fact, or SQL Server integration services. If you have dependencies on any of these services, or if you are really leveraging some vendor application or ISV application, which is not yet supported on the Azure, then you can still stay where you are today, but then you can start leveraging all the Azure services that by enabling your SQL Server to Arc-enabled SQL Server. The other option is that if you really want to modernize and really want to enjoy the platform as a service benefits that Azure generally provides to you in your own infrastructure, you can do that as well. You can really deploy the Azure data Arc-enabled data services in your existing infrastructure itself. We call that as Arc-enabled data services. Today, you can really deploy the Arc-enabled managed instance and Arc-enabled PostgreSQL. So these are the two services that are available that you can really deploy in your own infrastructure, right? And at the same time, your experiences are going to be consistent with Azure, and your billing and everything is also consistent with your Azure. The experiences are similar between your Arc-enabled data services in your own infrastructure and then the platform as services which are running on the Azure, right? Those are the two options that are available for you to migrate. Hope that really resolves how to really find which service is good for your workloads.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, and it gives me a really nice summary of like when to use what service and when to use which scenario and which options. And it's, again, I just mentioned again, it's really great that we have all these different options, again, depending on where the customer is in their journey. So since we are here to talk more about Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server, can you tell us a little bit more about that and how it works?
So in a simple words, Arc-enabled SQL Server, what it really means is that you can deploy your SQL Server anywhere you want, but we are giving you an ability that you can really centrally manage your SQL Server from Azure. And by the way, it is generally available today, and we keep on adding more capabilities to bring value of the Azure Arc-enabled SQL Servers to you. So basically, we are bringing the value of Azure to you. One of the items is that Microsoft Defender, which really help customers to secure their environment, proactively identify the attacks and vulnerabilities. We completely automated in the form of Microsoft Defender service on the Azure. Now you can bring that that service to your existing SQL Server and then really safeguard your SQL Server. And then we also enabling a single sign-on and multi-factor authentication so that you don't have to deal with multiple accounts and logins and all that. So we are very seamlessly integrating with Azure Active Directory. And then there is another feature that DBS really love is that the SQL Server best practice assessment. So Most of the DBAs that I talk, they spend a lot of their time in making sure that their SQL servers are healthy. We completely automated that based on the Microsoft best practices that have been worked with thousands of customers that we worked with. And then now we came up with as an assessment to you so that we can really give you the health report of your SQL server, proactively identify the risks, and then we also provide the mitigation steps so that you can bring your SQL server into healthy state. By the way, all these features are supported for both SQL servers running on the Windows and as well as the Linux. Right? These are some of the key capabilities that we recently built, and then more is coming. We are making a lot of investments to make your manageability operations much flexible for all the SQL servers wherever they are right now deployed.
Fantastic. So can you share us a little bit more on the architecture of Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server and how this all works and like how we bring it together? That would be great.
Think about your SQL servers which are sitting in the on-prem. Now you really want to enable Arc-enable that SQL Server. Pretty simple steps. Before you Arc-enable your SQL Server, you also need to enable Arc Server, right? And then that Arc Server will really install the guest agent on your SQL Server locally. And then the next step is that you Arc-enable that SQL Server as well. So you will see, once you Arc-enable that SQL Server, you will see both resources are on the Azure Portal, right? One is Arc Server and the other one is Arc SQL Server. Once the way that these servers communicate with Azure is that using the port 443 public internet, but with a more of an encrypted connection manner so that you don't really run into any security issues. So we encrypt the whole communication between on-premises and as well as the Azure resources. But you can also start enabling private link as well in case if you have any express route connection or site-to-site VPN, you can really route this network traffic through that private link as well, so that you can really make it more secure, right? So once you enable these resources to Azure, now these are Arc resources. Now you can start leveraging all the Azure services and attach those Azure services to your existing SQL Server infrastructure, right? Like the features like best practices assessment, which are also called as environment health, and then Defender. You can very simply seamlessly integrate those services into your SQL Server as if they are like built-in services that are built for you, right? That's how this whole thing works. Now, not only that you can really individually enable the SQL servers to the Arc SQL Server resource on the Azure, but we also give an ability for you to enable these SQL servers at scale using some Azure policies actually. So I have a number of customers who are enabling Arc SQL Server on thousands of their SQL servers using our scale experiences that we provided. And I'm going to give a demo on how to really enable the SQL servers at scale as well.
Okay, this is super interesting. So we talked obviously about hybrid and multi-cloud, and you mentioned now that we can add like SQL servers running on premises. What about SQL Server running at other cloud providers, like for example AWS or at service providers and so on? Can I also add these?
Yes. So like I mentioned, right, SQL Server you deploy anywhere you want. That could be a private cloud, that could be a local data center, or non-Azure clouds like AWS and GCP. You can be able to manage centrally from Azure itself. That's the real value of having these services in place.
Okay, this is fantastic. So can you quickly show us how we would actually onboard a SQL Server using Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server to Azure?
Sure. In this demo, I'm going to show you how to onboard your SQL servers to Arc-enabled SQL servers so that you can really manage your SQL servers from the Azure. There are multiple methods depending on the scope at which that you are onboarding your SQL servers. I'm going to show you all those methods. In the very first scenario, imagine that you are managing one or two SQL servers, that now you want to really onboard those SQL servers to Arc-enabled SQL Server. And if the server is already onboarded with Arc-enabled server, then onboarding a SQL server is pretty easy. So in this method, here I have a server name called Northwind Server 3. And I know that the SQL Server is installed on this particular server. In order to onboard the SQL Server, all you need to do is go to Northwind Server 3 Arc server resource, which I am doing it here, and then go to the extensions tab here. And in the extensions tab, you will see the different extensions that are already installed on the Arc server. All you need to do is you just click on the add button here, and then it will list out the extensions that are available, and you need to select the SQL Server extension for Azure Arc and go to the next tab. And this is the place where if you have multiple SQL Server instances, you can exclude any of those instances from that server. And then the next step is just review and create. So what will it do is it will scan your server and then identify if SQL Server is installed. It will detect the SQL Server is being installed, and then it will install a SQL Server extension on top of it, so that you can start seeing the Arc-enabled SQL Server resource on the Azure Portal within 5 minutes as soon as the deployment completes. So this is one way to Arc-enable your SQL Server. Right. And now I'm going to show you a method where, again, the scenario is you have 1 or 2 SQL servers that you are really managing, and the servers are not Arc-enabled yet to begin with. So you're going to be starting enabling them. First Arc-enable the server and then install the SQL Server extension so that you can enable Arc-enabled SQL Server as well. So the method that you do is you go to the portal here and then look for SQL Server Azure Arc resources. You can also use the search bar to look for SQL Server Azure Arc resources. So I click that here, and then now here I already see that there are few SQL servers that are already Arc enabled. Now I'm going to add a new one. So I go to add button there, and then I'm going to use the connect servers here, and then I go to the, and now I provide the server details. So at first I'm going to give a subscription where I really want to create this Arc-enabled SQL Server resource, and I select a specific resource group where I really want to create, and then I pick the region where I want to really create this resource. And like I said in my previous slides, we support Arc enablement for both Windows and as well as the Linux. SQL servers running on Windows and as well as the Linux. So I'm going to select Windows here because that's where my operating system is. And then I can also specify a proxy server in case, if the connection between or the traffic between your SQL server and then Azure, if you want to bypass through the proxy server, you can provide that information as well. And then I'm going to go to the tags, and I can provide tags to denote this particular server, and then I'm going to the run script. So here we generated a PowerShell script for you, and everything is done. All the parameters are completely filled in. You just take this PowerShell script and execute on the actual SQL server. So I have this SQL server that I want to onboard now. So I'm going to go to open a PowerShell console here, and then this is the script that the previous wizard experience generated to me, and then I'm going to just simply execute it. Once I execute it, and after the script execution completed, you see Arc-enabled SQL Server resource in the portal. So basically at that point of time, the script will onboard a Arc-enabled server first, install the guest agent, and then also install the SQL Server extension on top of it, and then it will add Arc-enabled SQL Server resource to the Azure portal, so that now you can start managing your SQL Server from Azure. So that's one way to do it. But then scenario number 3, what if you have hundreds of SQL servers that you really want to onboard, right? And then particularly if those servers are already enabled with Arc server, now you really want to enable them for Arc-enabled SQL Server as well. So you see here there are there are several number of servers that I already Arc-enabled in my whole subscriptions, multiple subscriptions in various regions. Now I want to really install the SQL Server extension on all these Arc servers wherever the SQL Server is deployed at scale. So the way that you could do is we provided you a policy, an Azure policy that you can really leverage to do this work. So what you do is you go to Azure policies, and then in the Azure policies, we created a policy for you named by configure SQL Server, SQL installed Azure Arc missions to have Arc-enabled SQL Server extension enabled. So basically you are telling by enabling this policy that go and then find out which of the Arc servers that have SQL Server is deployed and install the SQL Server extension on top of it, so that you can now Arc enable that SQL Server as well, right? So you can really search for that policy, and then you can click on that policy. The policy definition is going to look like this. And then all you need to do is you just need to assign. So when you click on that assign button, you need to really define the scope at which you want to execute or remediate this policy. You can select a subscription where you want to look for all the Arc servers and enable install SQL Server extension on top of it. I'm going to select the specific one, and then this time I want to apply this policy for the entire subscription as a whole, so I did not really select the resource group. Select and then just do an enable button here, and then just review and create. So what this will policy is, again, it will policy scan across all your Arc servers and then discover the servers that have SQL Server installed, and then just install the SQL extension on it. Within 20 to 25 minutes, you will start seeing those Arc-enabled SQL Server resources in your Arc SQL Server resource page on the Azure Portal. Right? That's one way to do it. The other way you can do it at scale is go back to the home here, and then look for SQL Server Arc resources here. Here we also provided a button experience where it will really automatic Arc-enabled SQL Server registration. So here also you can select a specific subscription where all these Arc servers are hosted, and then you can also select a resource group optionally, and then just click on accept and enable. So this will also does the same thing. It will go after the subscription, find out all the Arc servers, and then discover the SQL Server is being deployed, and then just install the SQL extension on it, and then it will make all those servers Arc-enabled SQL servers. So that's how you can really do it at a scale. So now that you saw the different ways that you can really onboard your SQL Server to Arc-enabled SQL Server, so go ahead and try whichever method that works for you, depending on the scope at which that you are really onboarding, and then start managing your SQL servers from the Azure.
Thank you, Raj. This was great. So I'm super impressed. I get now this visibility and these instances showing up in Azure as an Azure resource. Can you go a little bit deeper into that as well, and how, like, for example, the inventory and assessment works?
When these workloads are spread across in multiple environments, the inventory, maintaining an inventory or getting the insights about all the IT assets in a single place is a big challenge. So that is where Arc-enabled SQL servers really provide you a single consistent view of all your SQL servers and how your workloads have dependency on those SQL servers. So that's dependency matrix really helps customers to prioritize which workloads goes to the Azure, which workloads really stay on-prem based on those dependencies. So it really helps them to do that kind of an assessment, right? And the inventory analysis that we do also help you to identify if any of those SQL servers might be running out of support or needed extended security patches. You can simply run some queries that we enable through Azure Graph and then list out all those SQL servers where they need your attention. Not only that, you can be able to go and then download those extended security patches and apply those on your SQL servers. So inventory management is a great feature that really help you to manage your assets altogether to begin with.
Oh, this is fantastic, because I know a lot of customers, they suddenly have like instances like where they don't know really where they came from, and then they're not sure if they're actually secured or not. So this really can help customers protect their workloads. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's very true. Like, I used to work as a DBA in my previous roles. I used to create some databases for my own testing and development purposes, and then I usually forget. I call them as like more of a zombie databases, which I don't use it, but I keep on paying for them. So this is a great way that you can really find out those insights from this inventory to see which databases are in use, which are not in use, so that I can really clean up the stuff and save costs for my company.
Oh, this is fantastic, especially when they can discover when new ones are coming online. So can you share us also like some more benefits for like DBAs when they use Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server?
So the other feature that I heard like DBAs really love it, which really going to save a lot of productivity for DBAs, which is SQL Server Assessment, also called as a best practice assessment. It automatically scans all your SQL servers that are Arc-enabled, and then really find out the health of your existing SQL servers in various areas. We look into the performance and scalability areas. We look into disaster recovery. We look into the security. So we look at your SQL servers from 360 degrees viewpoint, and then really report you the health of those SQL servers in those specific areas. But at the same time, we proactively identify the risks actually. And we also categorize those risks in critical, medium, kind of a low, so that you can really prioritize which of those items that you really want to address. So when we give these proactive recommendations, we also provide the mitigation steps, how to address them. So that the idea here is that once you really address at least the critical ones and apply the mitigations that we recommended to you, we expect your SQL Server becomes more healthy, so that you don't really run into any critical scenarios that you have to call Microsoft when your server is down or server is not available. You can really avoid those kind of scenarios, which are very expensive for both you as a customer and as well as for Microsoft. So we want to make sure that you proactively take some actions to really secure, manage, and really configure your SQL Server for rendering the best outcome to you. So that is where the SQL Server assessment really helps you.
This sounds really incredible. Do you might have a demo showing the SQL Server Best Practice Analyzer?
Yeah, let me show you how to configure this and how to really navigate through some of these mitigation steps that we provide through the SQL assessment. In this demo, at first I'm going to show you how the SQL Server Best Practice Assessment. In this demo, at first I'm going to show you how the SQL Server Assessment really help DBAs to proactively monitor the health of their SQL servers and then identify any areas that the SQL Server is running into risks and then mitigate them so that they can really bring the SQL servers into healthy state. So this report is really saves a lot of productivity of the DBAs by automating the health monitoring and then identifying the risks associated with your SQL servers at scale. It really helps the DBAs. Now let's take a look at the environment health. The way that you get access to this report is by going into the Arc-enabled SQL Server resource here, and then by clicking the environment health, then it will load your environment health report. As you see here, the SQL Server scans across your SQL Server environment and as well as the databases comprehensively, and then identify if your SQL Server is running into any issues or risks in the areas like security and compliance, availability and business continuity, and performance and scalability and more, and then really give you a prioritized list of recommendations that are violating the best practice recommendations. And then it also provide you the mitigation steps, how to really mitigate and then bring back your SQL Server to the healthy state. So let's examine few issues that are reported here. For example, in security and compliance area, it is reporting that XP-CMD shall extended stored procedure is enabled. Microsoft recommends to disable this extended stored procedure unless really needed by your workload or your application. The reason is that anybody who got access to XP-CMD shell, they can really compromise your operating system to begin with, which is a security risks. Not only that it identifies the risk, but also it also gives you how to mitigate that. It really give you a detailed suggested actions how to really fix this particular issue, so that you can go and then fix it this particular issue at scale for all your SQL servers, and then bring back your SQL Server to the healthy state. The same way, if you go back to availability and business continuity, it identified a few databases that are the full backups are not really configured. So it's very critical that you have a right set of backup and restore policies that are enabled on your SQL servers in order to protect your SQL servers in order to protect your data and your databases during the disaster recovery times. So especially it is very critical for the production databases, right? The same way, there are issues that are identified in performance area as well, like modify the auto growth of your database files so that they don't really interact or interfere during the peak production time. So that way, the SQL assessment really give you the recommendations in various areas and then really help you to configure for your SQL servers for the optimal use, right? So this definitely helps the DBAs to really configure and optimize their production workloads, and then save a lot of the productivity time as well. So now the question is, how do I get to it, basically, right? The way that you configure this SQL assessment is that you go to your Arc-enabled SQL Server resource, and then click on the environment health, where it provides you simple steps that you can go on and configure. So at first, you need to install a Microsoft monitoring agent. So we use Microsoft monitoring agent, which is being installed as an extension on your SQL Server, which is responsible for collecting all the data that is required for the assessment to give you the recommendations, and then upload that information into the log analytical workspace. So if it is already installed, then it will auto detect and then tell you that MMA is installed and you can go to the next step. But if it is not installed, then it also let you know. In case if it is not installed, the way that you install this extension is you go to the Arc-enabled server resource, and then go to the extensions tab here, and then you just click on the add button. You look for the log analytics agent for Azure Arc, and then you click the next button there. You need to provide the workspace ID and workspace key for the log analytical workspace that you need to create if it doesn't exist already, so that Microsoft monitoring agent will upload all the data that is being collected to that the workspace, so that the assessment can provide an assessment results from there. So Microsoft will not be able to see any of your data. All the workspace is in your own subscription. So we upload the information to a workspace that is created in your own subscription to begin with, right? So you configure that. Once you provide that, you just create, and once that is created, you come back to the Arc-enabled SQL Server resource environment health configuration page, and then you also need to provide a domain user account that MMA agent can use to connect to your SQL servers and then collect all that information. So once you provide that, and then you also provide a working directory so that the information can be, or the data can be collected locally on the SQL Server to this folder, right? So those are the two inputs that you need to provide, and then you download that configuration script, take that configuration PowerShell script, and then just simply execute on your SQL Server. So I have the SQL Server, I opened a PowerShell window, I just execute. So if once this script execution is completed, and then the health assessment or the assessment is going to start collecting the data as per the schedule that you provide, and then start uploading the data to the log analytical workspace. Come back here, and then just click on the environment health so that you can start seeing that report. So that's how this environment health is really going to help DBAs to monitor the health of your SQL Server and optimize it for production usage.
Oh, this was fantastic. Great demo. So when we talked earlier, you also mentioned security, and I know that there is Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Can you show how that works with Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server?
A Defender for Arc-enabled SQL Servers really help you to harden your SQL servers. Wherever those SQL servers exist, whether they could be on Azure or they could be on on-premises or maybe running on non-Azure clouds, Because SQL Server is our proprietary database services, we know how to secure best your SQL Server environment, and all that knowledge has been embedded into Defender as a service. Now we want to bring that to your SQL servers which are running in non-Azure environments as well, right? It continuously scans and proactively identifies any attacks that are happening onto your SQL Server environment, vulnerabilities, and then it also really provides you the mitigation steps. So most of these mitigations are automated, but in case if some of those mitigations are not automated, we also provide you the step-by-step guidance how to mitigate them as well. So that way you can really don't have to worry about your SQL Server environment anymore. You just enable Defender and we will safeguard your SQL servers to begin with, right? That is the only reason that you see that Microsoft has reported least number of security incidents in last few years actually, because we know how to secure your SQL Server best. So you can really leverage Defender. A lot of customers does that. So that really gives the power of securing your SQL servers with that service.
Can you show me a demo of Microsoft Defender for Cloud for Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server?
Sure, let me show you the power of Defender. At first, let me show you how the Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which is seamlessly integrated into your Arc-enabled SQL Server, really help you to safeguard your SQL Server environment. So I'm on my Arc-enabled SQL Server resource on the Azure Portal. I'm going to click on Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and then it takes me to the assessment, which it already performed. So let's examine few security issues and recommendations that are provided here. So if I click on some of the vulnerabilities that are found, so you see a wide variety of issues that are being raised for us with various levels of severity. So for example, it recommends me to disable the SA login. So Microsoft always recommends to disable SA login, which is very powerful user, right? And if I double click that issue, actually it provides you the severity so that you can really prioritize this issue, and you want to make sure that you all address these issues that are filed with or executed with the high severity as soon as possible. And then it also provides you the impact. What will happen if you don't really mitigate this issue that is reported? And then it also provides you the remediation. How do you really fix it? So in case if you want to use the tsql command to understand the impacted object, or if you really want to integrate this tsql command to any of the other tools that you might be using it, we provide you that query to you as well. So that's how the Microsoft Defender really gives you a comprehensive analysis and mitigation steps to address some of the security issues that are being raised. So I'm going to go back a little bit and then examine few other issues here. It's recommend you to encrypt your TDS communication between your client and as well as the SQL Server connection, so that all the traffic that goes through that connection will be encrypted. And then it also says that some of the features that might impact your security that needs to be disabled. So basically it identifies the databases where the cross DB ownership chaining is enabled, contained database authentication is enabled, and provided for remote access. So it's going to identify all those databases for you, and then really recommend you to disable some of these options if you are not really using it, or your workload is not really using some of these options. So that way it scans the entire SQL Server environment holistically, and then proactively identify the attacks, the vulnerabilities, the configurations which violates the best practice recommendations that Microsoft generally provides based on vast variety of thousands of our customer experiences, and then gives you the mitigation steps that you can go on then address. So this is a very powerful service that you can really enable to get the maximum value and safeguard your SQL Server to begin with, right? But then the question, how do we really enable this? It's pretty simple. This is the simplest thing that you can do to your SQL Server environment to secure. Actually, it's one of the requirements that you need to make sure that the Microsoft monitoring agent is installed, So the way that you verify that Microsoft Monitoring Agent is installed is by going to the parent Arc server resource and then go to the extensions and then make sure that the Microsoft Monitoring Agent is installed and it is healthy. If it is not being installed, then you can use that add button and then just simply install Log Analytical Agents, so that you can select the Log Analytics agent that will install the Microsoft Monitoring Agent. So that's one requirement. Once that requirement is met, then you go to the portal back again. You need to enable the sources from the Microsoft Defender service. Microsoft Defender for cloud and go to environment settings here and then select a specific subscription where you want to really enable the Microsoft Defender for the resources that exist in that particular subscription. So in this, so I'm going to search for my subscription here. This is my subscription, Arc-enabled infrastructure dash demo. And then there are various Defender plans that are provided. So in my case, it is going to belong to the database category. So I'm going to click on, I need to go back. Yeah, so databases category here. And I want to make sure that the SQL servers on machines is enabled. So if it is on, then any Arc-enabled SQL Server resource you are onboarding to this specific subscription, that Microsoft Defender will automatically enable it for you. You don't have to do anything else. So there are only two requirements for making it work. One is you make sure that you install the Microsoft Monitoring Agent on the parent Arc-enabled server, and then come to the Microsoft Defender environments and find out that the databases plan, and then make sure that the SQL servers on machines is on. That way we can really auto-enable the Microsoft Defender for you for all the resources that are coming into the subscription, all the Arc SQL Server resources that are coming into the subscription. As simple as that. So now that you know how to enable Defender and the value of the Defender to secure your SQL Server, please go ahead and start secure your SQL servers using the Microsoft Defender, regardless where those SQL servers are being installed.
Oh, this is great. And I think really like what we can see is really bringing the power of the cloud to on-premises and multi-cloud environments. And in this case with Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server. So thank you very much for showing this, Raj. I cannot wait to have more videos on that topic. But in the meantime, if our viewers want to learn more, where do they go?
So we have plenty of documentation that we created for customers to learn these services and start leveraging them. You can always go to aka.ms arc data learn. That's where you can really start learning about Arc data services, Arc-enabled SQL servers. And then we also have aka.ms arc trial, where you can really get a jumpstart experience. What it really means is that we built an environment for you that you can, using some templatization, and you can simply download and follow the step-by-step instructions that you can really deploy Arc data services in your own infrastructure. So that way you can really play around with a lot of the services that are provided.
No, thank you very much. I'm really excited about that. And thank you to everyone watching. Make sure you check out our hybrid and multi-cloud scenario in the Cloud Adoption Framework and in our Azure Architecture Center.